Look at verse 2. And though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith so that I could remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. Wow. You still think about this verse for a minute. Saying, look, even if you have the faith to move mountains, if miracles happen when you speak because you know God and miracles happen, but if you don't have love, you're still nothing. Now, I don't even know if that's possible without love, but but to have the gift of prophecy. If I was a true prophet and I wasn't loving, I'd still be nothing. And if I could explain all mysteries but had love, I'm still nothing. Then we go to verse 3. And though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned, but have not love, it profits me nothing. It's saying even if I'm a martyr for the truth, if I lack love, there's no profit in it. Let's go to verse 13 where Paul sums up. It says, now abide faith, hope, love, these three, but the greatest of these is love. Do you think Paul meant that? You think he meant it? I mean, when we really take what this verse is saying, if we can't learn to love our spouse, how are we ever going to convince the world we're loving Christians? With the person that's the closest to you, if you fail there, you have failed, period. All right? So the ultimate evidence of Christianity is love, and the area of greatest test is the home. John 3:16, the most well-known Bible verse is, God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish but have everlasting life. He gave his Son. This is a verse about God's love, right? And if we believe it, then we have hope to have eternal life. But this whole thing about love, I'm coming back to this quote from Desire of Ages 6:41. When we love the world as he has loved it. And how much did Jesus love this world? Yeah. This much? He says when we love the world as he has loved it, then for us, his mission is accomplished. Is that simple? The concept is simple. But is it simple? No. It might be the hardest thing in the world. And none of us are going to do that without a complete transformation of character. We have to somehow ask God, give me a greater capacity to love. I think I'm limited in some ways, and I don't know why. But Lord, enlarge my capacity because I want to be like Jesus. All right, so I'm going to briefly mention the other three tangible ways to communicate love, or other three languages of love. And this one picture is going to just give that away. Giving and receiving gifts. So write these down. You probably are aware that gifts mean more to some people than they do to others. I was pretty much over gifts by the time I was 9 because I was tired at Christmas of getting a bunch of junk wrapped up. I'm serious. I asked for things. Of course, I asked for things that cost stuff. And there were 9 people in the family, so there wasn't a lot of money to go around. So I got my packages with a couple of pairs of socks and some underwear and maybe a shirt. And I'm like, as a 9-year-old, that's not very exciting, right? So I decided Christmas was just this big letdown, and I didn't care about it, all right? So, but the right gift at the right time can mean something to me. I'm not devoid of appreciation for gifts. I've received some gifts that were pretty important to me, but generally it's not something that matters much to me. But back when I was teaching at Heartland College, I went on mission trips to Africa, and when I would go on mission trips to Africa, and I always made sure I had a little bit of money so I could bring my wife a gift back, my son a gift back, and my daughter. Most of the money I spent was on my daughter, because when I came back, she was always ready to see what Daddy brought for her. My son never even gave it a thought. And so I'd buy him a $2 wood-carved lion, because that's cool, it's macho, and he was happy with it. Just $2. Oh, in the stores here, it would have cost 40. But, and then, I try to get something I knew my wife would appreciate, but gifts are not as big a deal to her either. Although your wife, you better do a little better than I did for my son, right? I didn't bring her a carved lion, don't worry. But man, I would search to find just the right thing for my daughter. Because when I got there, she knew I'd had something for her, and I didn't want to disappoint her. And when she was like 4 years old, she kind of was starting to get the value of money, and she knew pennies weren't worth much, but she thought that if she wrapped up a penny in a little piece of tinfoil, it would sparkle more and somehow make it more valuable. And she'd come to me and present it to me like, look, Dad, look what I got for you. My son didn't do those things. My daughter did. So gifts was more important to her. Now, gifts was not her primary love language. Children tend to overvalue, or maybe I shouldn't say overvalue, they tend to value gifts more, and as they get older, it's not as important. So that's not as important to my daughter now, but it's still more important than it is to some people. My daughter's primary love language is quality time. All right? So anyway, it's both giving and receiving. A person whose love language is gifts likes to give people gifts. It matters to them, and they want to make sure that you got it. Like we have a relative, if she sends us something, and we don't call and let her know it arrived. She calls us because she wants to know. And so, flowers is a way of giving love, or cards, something that shows they were thinking of you, matters to people. Now, I've mentioned that gifts are not very meaningful to me, but there is one gift that is the most important thing in the world to me. And that's when Jesus gave himself, even to the death of the cross. The greatest manifestation of love that has ever existed in the universe was a gift. And, in fact, Paul called it the unspeakable gift in one place. And then in Romans 6:23, he said, the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. So gifts can be pretty important. That was number 3, yeah. All right, number 4 is tender touch. Tender touch communicates I love you, and truthfully, it doesn't fit some cultures as well as others. And I got to tell you about an experience I had, and this experience is going to give away that this is my primary love language. Okay? I had been teaching a couple years, and I think I was at camp meeting in the Southern New England Conference. And I was eating in the cafeteria at the college. They used the college cafeteria with their camp meeting. And a pastor in the conference came and sat down with me. I was not a pastor, I was a teacher, but I graduated from academy with his son, and he knew me and I knew him, and he actually went to school with my parents. So there was a little bit of a connection there, and he came and decided to sit by me. And then another pastor that I didn't know saw where he sat and went and sat with him, and that other pastor was across from me. And so my parents had pretty much finished going through a divorce. And so this pastor that knew my parents was asking me about the situation. Kind of personal stuff, but we knew each other well enough, I didn't mind. And I was answering his questions. And in my mind, this is old stuff. I'm just filling in someone who's wondering how they're doing, and he'll probably pray more for them, and that's good. So I wasn't very emotional about it. I was just giving him the facts of what happened with my parents. And, and I told him what happened with my brother, and that was the trigger on the marriage. So the other pastor that I didn't know was listening intently. And he picked, he could tell that the one pastor and I had known each other quite some time. And then when we were done eating, I stood up, to go take my tray, and the other pastor said, "Could you not pick up your tray for a minute?" And I said, "Okay." And he stood up and he walked around. He says, "I would like your permission to give you a hug." And I said, "Okay. Okay." A little strange maybe, but, Yeah, I don't mind. I'm not a guy who's too macho to hug. So he gave me this bear hug. And for the life of me, I wasn't really emotional, but all of a sudden I was. And tears started running down my cheeks. I had no clue why. I didn't know why. Why did that hug just make me so vulnerable? But it did. And I was a little bit embarrassed. But he seemed to know exactly what he was doing. And some years later, I ran into some people that knew that pastor. I remembered his name, and I told him what happened. He goes, oh, yeah, that's him. He always seems to know the right thing to do. And so I was perplexed as to why that happened for a number of years. I think back on it, and I feel a little embarrassed, because, I was probably 25 when that happened. I was still young enough to think being macho is pretty important, And, my 8th and 7th graders, they always wanted to beat me at everything. I was real competitive with my school kids, and we had a blast. And so I still had a little bit of a macho mentality, even though I'd had a real conversion experience and knew that was just ridiculous. I still couldn't understand, how could a hug from somebody I didn't know have such an effect on me? Well, he'd been listening for a while, so we kind of were getting to know each other without, indirectly. So then, it must have been my sister gave me a book called The Love Languages. Anyone here read the book, The Love Languages? All right, see a few hands. And as I was reading that book, and I came to the chapter on, we called it physical touch. I prefer to just call it tender touch. And I'm reading that, and I said, oh, man, that is me. That is me. And I didn't like it. That's not macho. It felt too needy. Come on, I don't need this. If my wife doesn't want to give me tender touch, so. But it wasn't really that way. When I didn't get it, it was like this big void in my life. So, the family role is important, but the problem with tender touch is that you can't just indiscriminately exercise that language without you being careful, because you can get in trouble. There are some people you just can't do that with. And so, it's easily misunderstood by people who don't get it. And also, it could be something that somebody takes advantage of that has evil purposes. All right? So, anyway, when I read the book, I started thinking about, at that time, I think Lori and I had been married about 15 years. And I was thinking about a situation. I was pastoring in Iowa at the time, and we were homeschooling our children. And my wife had a job in the morning, and she'd be home at lunchtime, and I would homeschool the kids in the morning, and then when she got back at lunchtime, she would take her subject with the kids, and I would go off on pastoral work. And when I read the chapter in the book, all of a sudden I understood some things that I had been feeling, because, in the morning, sometimes you're in a hurry. She doesn't want to be late for work, so we're eating breakfast, and sometimes she finishes, and then she goes out the door. She goes out the door, sometimes in a hurry, no kiss, no touch, and so what, right? She'll be back at noon. But when that happened, I would feel something missing in my life. And I didn't recognize it at first. It's just over time I start to, you realize, and so I would say to her, you could at least give your husband a kiss goodbye before you run out the door. She goes, well, I was afraid I'd be late. And I said, well, you don't even have to give me a kiss. When you walk by, well, actually, when I read the book, I said, you don't even have to give me a kiss, because it's not about a kiss. It's not about intimacy. When you walk by to go to the door, just brush my hand as you go by. Or just touch my shoulder. You guys think this is ridiculous, but it made the difference. It was like that touch told me everything was okay, and then I could concentrate on doing the lessons with my kids. And when I read the book, I said, man, I wish I had a different love language. Because I felt needy. Her love language wasn't tender touch, so she didn't know. And so reading this book opened up our eyes, and it started giving the marriage more things, more, I'll say, pizzazz even. Okay? So anyway, when you look at tender touch, did Jesus ever use tender touch to communicate with people? Yeah. When he healed a blind man's eyes, he touched their eyes. When he healed the leper, he did the unthinkable. He touched the leper. Man, wouldn't you like to be just touched by Jesus? Yes. Yeah. So, in the whole parable of the prodigal son, pretty big tender touch at the end when the son comes back, right? All right. Now, those of you that know the 5 love languages, which one have I not covered yet? Acts of service. Yeah. In fact, I think I have a slide for this one. All right, here's someone washing dishes and someone mowing the lawn. Basically, everyone appreciates helpful acts, right? What one does around the home really matters a lot more to some than to others. That's how they understand love. Is making the bed an act of love? Is dusting an act of love? Is washing the car an act of love? Is vacuuming an act of love? Some people just look at it, these are just chores you got to do. But there's other people who actually do it, and in their mind, they're loving their family. Now, if the family takes advantage of them, that won't last. Because nobody wants to be used, right? And so oftentimes, people who have this love language of acts of service have been frustrated for so many years, it doesn't even feel like a love language to them anymore. Because people take advantage of it. Let them go ahead and do all that. Okay? So, like for instance, if a husband says, the lawn's getting kind of thick, and the husband says, or the wife says, would you mow the lawn today if you can get a chance? And then she goes off to work and comes back later. The lawn's not mowed, but he's got flowers for her. She says, don't even give me flowers if you didn't mow the lawn like you said you would. Because somebody whose love language is acts of service, they feel loved by whether you mowed the lawn or not by the flowers. In fact, they can appreciate the flowers very easily if the lawn is mowed. But if the lawn's not mowed, go give the flowers to somebody else. Or, okay, I'll put them up. I'll put them up. There. Thanks for the flowers. All right? So acts of service. You think of Jesus in the carpenter shop. You think of Jesus washing the disciples' feet as a servant, and he asks us to serve. So have you figured out your primary love language? There is a survey you can take. And if you would like to do the survey, it's just 30 questions where you just give 2 things to choose from as to which means the most to you, and it pretty much figures it out. And when I've done marriage counseling with people, I always have them do it so we can talk about what it means. I want to give them a heads up, really important. It took me almost 20 years to get that figured out. Why not have it figured out before you even get married, right? So, Lexi probably has the survey. Right? Raise your hand, Lexi. I want them to. So you could probably see her to get a survey or see me to get a survey if you want to, do it to figure out your love language. And if couples want to do it, it's really nice if if both do it and you find out what the other one is. How about a son or a daughter? There's actually a survey. The survey I have is for married couples, but there's also one for not married couples. And the questions are a little less, you know what I mean. Now, I'm going to make a little confession here. Well, let me ask you this. How can you show love to another person in your life that you really would like to know their love language? Do you think just knowing the love language will make it easy? No, knowing the love language only gives you direction. The hard part is actually doing what you know you should. And I struggle with this because when I was reading the book, before Lori ever saw it, I knew her love language was acts of service. And that was her primary love language. And it really made me sad. Why? Because I knew that to communicate love effectively with her would require more time doing things like chores. It sounded more like slavery. It wasn't romantic. My love language is tender touch. And chores are not romantic at all. But I also realized, and I didn't realize it well enough at first, that if her love language was acts of service, my tender touch was going to be annoying to her, not welcome, if I wasn't doing the service. That's why it made me sad. But then I prayed, and about 2 days later, I said, okay, we'll give it a shot. And I found out that when I did something that was unexpected, the result was amazing. But I could see that it would require more effort and communication of my love. And, then I have to think, all right, what about my children? So let me ask you a question. Is true love natural, or does it sometimes require effort? What matters more to you? When someone does something because they really wanted to do it anyway, some kindness, or when they choose to sacrifice what they wanted because they value you so much? Now, that's a hard question, because we want people to just naturally love us, right? But is it any less love when they sacrifice what they wanted because they value you so much and they went against their natural feelings? It might even be a greater love. But I'll let you grapple with that. See, the point is, true love doesn't always come natural. If you're waiting for it to come natural, everything will fail. You don't always feel it. It's a choice. It's a choice. Yeah, I think you're right, but I've seen grandchildren that it's not natural to love them. She was just saying with grandchildren, it's natural to love them. And you're speaking as a grandma, right? Yeah, I totally get what you're saying. But I do know of cases where children were so incorrigible, even the grandparents didn't want to be around them. But that's rare. That's rare. Now, but here's the thing. When love is chosen and acted upon, the good feelings will come sooner or later. And it'll feel natural again. Natural's good. Don't think I'm not saying so. Now, here's the thing. I once heard a preacher say that the only true obedience is natural obedience. That's probably true for angels who haven't fallen. But obedience to God is like love. It isn't always natural for fallen humanity. For angels, yes. And it can be more and more so for us as we grow closer to God. But often, even our love toward God is a choice to love against how you feel. And we choose to love and obey God. Amen. There are people who think Christianity doesn't work because they don't feel any natural love for God. Because they believe the lie. There is no such thing as natural love for God until the Holy Spirit has been received in some way, not maybe in fullness, but we're drawn by God's love even when we're rebels. And so to turn around and naturally feel love for God, you can't expect that until you've been born again. James 4:7 says, submit yourselves therefore to God and resist the devil and he will flee from you. There's a submission there that is a condition for it all working. We submit to God. Does submitting always feel good? No. It isn't natural at all to our fallen nature. But Philippians 4:13 says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. So there can be growth. So it can start to feel more natural. And, it's called God's enabling grace. Now, I believe I have this is Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. He says, and he went a little farther and fell on his face and prayed, saying, Oh, my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt. Do you understand that Jesus' natural feelings were not to follow through with the love for the human race? Do you understand that? He's asking God if there's a way out. Because he really did take our humanity. And our humanity is difficult to cope with. And it shows right here. He says, I don't feel ready to go to the cross. Is there another way? And he says, nevertheless, I'll do your will. And so Jesus himself chose to submit to the Father. He resisted the devil's temptation and he overcame, not by feeling natural love, but it was a choice of love against his human feelings. And that's the greatest love we've ever seen. In his humanity, Jesus made that choice for us. So my question is, will we be willing to make that choice and love him? Will we be willing to make that choice to love our spouse, to love our children, to really figure out what makes our children tick and love them in their love language? And our brothers and sisters, or a friend, or an enemy. There was an old saying in the 60s, what the world needs now is love. It was very true, and it still is. Would you go through with love even if it requires us to go ahead of our natural feelings? To make the choice even though you don't feel like it? Because this is what the gospel is calling us to do. And very practical Christian living. So what will you do to communicate love to a specific person in your life that's probably waiting for you to figure them out and love them in their love language? What will you do?